Welcome back to another edition of our vacation rental market update. This one's for the month of August. Let's go ahead and get into it. So I dove into some interesting data from STR data that basically just showed that weekdays were pacing behind slower last year, whereas weekends were a little bit stronger this year in terms of pacing year over year. Basically, that's to say that August as a whole, and we're seeing this with what we manage, is a little bit slower than last year. The second half of August in particular looks slower. We're thinking a lot of this is caused by the schedule in which kids are going back to school. So kids tend to be, or seem to be, going back to school earlier this year. That was a trend that started last year, not only in our local South Carolina market, but also in some of the feeder markets that we grab guests from. This is both true at the high school level and the college level. So we're seeing that. We're also seeing another interesting trend that's really in the macro economy: international travel. International travel's down. We don't get a ton of international travel to Myrtle Beach, but in markets like Orlando, Florida, for example, they rely heavily on international travel. They're not getting that as much this year. So instead of just saying, shoot, we're just gonna have less guests, they're now targeting domestic travel, domestic guests, right? So they're going into markets that typically Myrtle Beach gets guests from and are starting to grab those guests. How that affects us is that, one, they're taking some of the guests that we would normally get. They're also advertising in these markets, which is driving up advertising costs, making it more expensive to grab guests from markets we would normally grab them from. So we're seeing overall, like I said, August being a little slower. What we're doing is we are adjusting our rates. Obviously, in the weekdays, we're trying to drive a little bit higher occupancy, whereas last year, maybe we had a stronger ADR during the weekdays. This year, we've dropped those rates a little bit to really up our occupancy. Hopefully, that offsets the lost revenue in terms of ADR. So that's what we're doing and seeing for August right now. The other big thing that we start talking about this time of year is snowbirds and monthly rentals. Obviously, that's a popular strategy here in the Myrtle Beach market in the off season. If you have a 1 or a 2 or a 3-bedroom condo, that can be the best strategy for you. So we start advertising to our snowbird guests this time of year. It's a different sort of marketing approach that we take. We advertise on different channels that we can get these guests from. The other nice thing that I'm gonna talk about more in a second here is that these guests tend to be a lot of repeat. So once you get them once, they typically will call you up this time of year too and either book again or book at another rental you have. So that's kind of a nice thing. But I wanted to dive into a little bit about the positives and the negatives, right? So on the positive end of the spectrum with these snowbird or monthly guests, typically we see you can make a little bit more revenue than you would just doing the weekly or weekend type short-term rentals. The other nice thing is when it comes to wear and tear, it's actually not as bad as you would think for someone that's staying there the entire month. These tend to be older guests, so typically they're not doing too much. They just want to relax on the balcony, take in the ocean views, drink their coffee, and they're really not using the apartment or the condo or any of the bedrooms all that much. So wear and tear is not that bad either. And then, like I said, these tend to be strong repeat guests. So once you get them once, there's a good chance they're going to come back. Now, on the negative end of the spectrum, there are some downsides. The obvious one being that if they take the whole month and you're an owner, you can't really use it that much, which is kind of a bummer. This is the time of year a lot of our owners like to come down and enjoy it. But if we're doing the snowbird strategy or monthly strategy in a certain month they want to come down, obviously it's going to be booked up. Another negative is you're going to get less reviews, right? So you might have a single stay that covers 3 months of your calendar. That can be good for revenue, but you won't get as many reviews, obviously, because you're just having one guest. The third and final negative is that you lose some momentum when it comes to bookings, right? So we've noticed on platforms like Airbnb and VRBO, they like to see consistent bookings coming in. That's a good signal to them, and that means they're going to push your listing up in the rankings. When you have a single guest for a monthly stay, you may go a few months then where you don't get any bookings, which could hurt your listing a little bit. But again, the trade-off for us is well worth it. We like the snowbird guest. We recommend those sort of rentals to our owners, and it can be a really good strategy for you in the off season where typically you just don't get a whole lot of rental demand. So that's kind of our updates for the August market update here. I hope you enjoyed it. If there's anything you want me to dive into, I do these videos. I try to get out one weekly. So if there's anything you want me to dive into in a future video, I am happy to do it. Otherwise, I'll do another monthly update in about a month. And I hope you like the video, subscribe, and can see you soon.